Have you ever been talking to an attractive woman and even though things seem to be going well, you just know something's missing? The conversation might be fun, even a bit flirtatious, and you're actually starting to feel a connection with her. But yet, in the back of your mind, you know you're holding back. Sometimes the mistakes that we make with women, they aren't necessarily the things that we said, rather it's what we failed to say. Very often, guys tiptoe around the topic of sex, afraid of coming off offensive or creepy, yet at the same time, we all know that sex is a healthy part of any kind of romantic relationship. So, at some point, the conversation has to progress into more explicit territory. It's what my good friend Bobby Rio calls the R-rated shift. And even though we all pretty much know that, there's not that much good information on how to sexualize a conversation, or at least not in an attractive way. So, in this video, I'm going to give you 5 of my favorite topics and techniques for transitioning a conversation towards sex. Alright, welcome back to the channel. As always, I am Rob. And to build on what I said in the intro, whenever you're talking to a woman and she's starting to feel that spark of attraction, you're presented a window of opportunity. As the man, you need to recognize this and take the lead, and then move the interaction towards a sexual climax. And I mean that both figuratively and literally. If you don't, that window of opportunity will begin to close and she'll start second guessing her feelings about you. I mean, this kind of explains why sometimes, even though a date went really well, a woman later goes cold over text. If that sounds familiar, ask yourself this. Did the interaction ever progress beyond a PG-13 rating? The answer is probably not, but it's not as simple as be more sexual next time. There's a bit of an art when it comes to sexualizing a conversation, or at least doing it in an attractive way. When done right, you can arouse a woman and put her in the mood without ever even laying a finger on her. When done wrong, however, you risk coming off like someone working on the set of a Nickelodeon show in the 90s. One way to think about it is through the analogy of a thermostat. If you dial up a thermostat too much, too soon, it makes everyone in the room feel very uncomfortable. And look, I don't want to make it seem like I'm up here on my soapbox pretending that I've never made this mistake, all right? My research for this video came from lessons, and note plural there, I had to learn the hard way. To relate one incident in particular, and this is going way back to when I had first just begun really trying to get better at approaching and meeting women. I remember I was at this swanky lounge on Bowery Street in Lower Manhattan, and I started chatting up this really attractive blonde. And I wanted to spice up the conversation a bit by, using a little sexualized humor. So I asked her if the necklace she was wearing was a set of anal beads. Well, not only did she not find my comment funny, the bouncer also really didn't think it was too humorous, as my night ended with him encouraging me to reflect on my mistake outside of the club. So, thankfully, I learned my lesson from that experience, which is good news for pretty much everyone involved here. Obviously, I came to realize that you need a bit more finesse when introducing a sexualized topic into the conversation. And look, it doesn't make a difference if you're an introvert or you're an extrovert. No guy wants to come off like a pervert. So let's get started. 1. Use explicit restraint. Explicit restraint is a 2-part statement that pairs something sexual with a reason why it can't happen, or at least why it can't happen just yet. Funny enough, you've probably already heard a woman use explicit restraint at some point. When women say things like, "Oh, I'm so tempted to go home with you, but I have a rule about not sleeping with guys on a first date," she's using explicit restraint. These sorts of statements are arousing because they dangle the carrot of sex, but then they pull it away. Also, these sorts of statements effectively amplify sexual tension in a more controlled way, which helps maintain a woman's comfort level. You get her thinking about sex, but you're also the one who's pacing the escalation. This puts the idea in her head without putting her on the spot. She can enjoy this erotic thought without feeling like she has to make a decision right then and there. Psychologically, it's almost like saying to someone, don't think of a pink elephant. Since our subconscious minds are unable to process negations, we can't help but picture a pink elephant in our mind's eye, right? And explicit restraint works along those same exact lines. By saying something sexual, you're going to plant that thought in her mind. But then, by adding a restraint, you maintain her comfort level. And again, since you're the one who's pumping the brakes, there's really no reason for her to feel awkward or offended. As simple as these statements are, they check 3 important boxes. First, it injects sexual tension. Second, it plants an erotic mental picture in her mind. Third, and finally, it's also a really good way to gauge her openness to sex. For example, I'd sometimes send a message with explicit restraint to women that I'd matched with on Tinder. After I'd gone back and forth messaging with them for a bit, I begin by saying that we should exchange numbers. And then I'd add a line like, oh, and don't worry, I'm not going to bombard you with my collection of dick pics. How a woman responded to that message often gave me a really good idea of how sexually open she may or may not be. I had some women write back things like, oh, you're gonna make me wait, huh? Which kind of told me that she's probably pretty sexually open. And while other women may have responded less enthusiastically, I never had a single woman ever call me out or suddenly go cold after sending that message. I did, after all, say I wasn't going to send her a bunch of dick pics. So, no harm, no foul. Now, full disclosure, I didn't send that message to every single woman I matched with on Tinder, and you certainly don't have to feel pressured to sexualize a conversation before you even meet a woman in real life. But if you're at that point in your life where you're not looking for anything serious or you're just looking for something a little bit more casual, sending a message like this with explicit restraint can really help set everyone's expectations on the right foot. Now look, if this seems a little bit outside your comfort zone, don't worry. Explicit restraint it's a bit more of a advanced concept or advanced technique. So if you don't have a ton of experience with women or you're just kind of building your confidence up, I'd recommend starting a bit less, aggressively, which is the perfect segue for our next topic. 2, use a third person. One of the reasons a woman might not necessarily respond to an overtly direct and sexualized comment is because it puts her on the spot. However, you can sidestep that by bringing up sex in the third person, which means detailing something that happened to one of your friends or to someone else. This technique works especially well when you're talking to a woman who comes from a more conservative culture or background, or even just a woman who seems a little bit more reserved about sex or intimacy. So here are a few ways that you can use a third person. First, you can tell her about something that you observed someone else do. For me, back when I lived in New York, I had this neighbor who would walk around naked all the time, and she would leave her blinds open. While there's nothing overtly sexual about that, I found that bringing it up in conversation, it was usually a safe and sort of even kind of a gentle way to start moving the conversation towards that R rating. Don't forget that thermostat analogy. Increasing the sexual temperature incrementally is often the best way to do it. Second, if you want something that's a little bit more forward, you can relate an anecdote about something that happened to one of your buddies. For example, I had this one friend who got caught fooling around with his girlfriend in Central Park. And he actually got caught by a mounted cop, which for those of you who don't know, it's one of those cops on horseback. So on dates, sometimes I'd bring this up or I'd mention it as if it just happened, as if this happened right before I got to the date. And then I would wait and see how my date responded to this. Some women got excited by the sexual parts of the story. Other women would focus on things like the legal ramifications or what was happening to him if he had to go to jail. And then there was even one time where my date busted up laughing because she thought the idea of a horse busting up this exhibitionist couple in Central Park was, knee-slapping comedy. The story may have missed its mark sexually, but it was still a net positive. 3, play off an adage or expression. Very similar to sexualizing in the third person, using an expression or an adage also raises the specter of the conversation, but it does it in a way that's a little less direct and not as aggressive. Funny enough, I actually learned this from a girl who did it to me. She was French, and on one of our first dates, we were having dinner together, and she raised her wine glass, and I assumed that she was raising her wine glass for a toast, so I raised mine, and I said, cheers. But when I looked at her, she kind of looked almost like shocked, maybe a little angry. And she told me, no, you must say chin chin, and you must look deep into my eyes or we're gonna have bad sex for 7 years. So being the gentleman I am, I did exactly what she asked of me. And about 7 minutes later after that, we were having sex. Not that it takes much to seduce me. I'm actually pretty easy. But still, this is a great technique and one that I actually ended up adopting into my own sort of seductive repertoire. And you should too, since it's so simple. In fact, it's so simple, make sure that you don't overcomplicate it. All you have to do is raise your wine glass for a toast and then say, wait, you have to look me right in the eye. Haven't you heard about what happens if you don't? we'll have bad sex for 7 years. And hey, look, if French culture is not your thing, you can use whatever cultural expression or idiom that you prefer. Even that old joke about adding the phrase in bed or during sex to the end of a fortune cookie could work here. When I was getting ready for this video, I just Googled fortune cookie sayings, and one of the first ones that popped up was, do not be afraid of competition, which then would become, do not be afraid of competition during sex. 4. Misinterpretation. Now, this is a bit of an old school strategy, which, when done right, can sexualize a conversation in a way that's both humorous and creates attractive tension. However, a word of warning here. If misapplied, this technique can very easily make you look immature or even a bit perverted. So you gotta be careful. Obviously, stuff like puns and double entendres work really well here. So if you were, say, walking across the street and the light's changing and she says, come quick, you might respond, geez, I'm a little bit more romantic than that. Or if it suddenly starts raining and she says, oh no, look at me, I'm dripping wet, you might respond, yeah, I had that effect on women. A word of warning though, make sure that your delivery is a bit understated. It shouldn't sound like you're overly excited to blurt out the sexualized remark. You should make it sound like you're just stating a fact. It's the difference between, oh yeah, I have that effect on women, versus, yeah, I have that effect on women. Also, resist the urge to go for the low-hanging fruit. A grown man making a that's what she said joke really isn't a good look. Basically, if a sophomore in high school would find it funny, it's probably not something you want to say to a woman that you're trying to sleep with. 5. Reframing. This brings us to our final technique, which is reframing the interaction to make it seem like she's the one pursuing you. This is also known as flipping the script, since women are usually the ones who frame men as the ones being overly interested in sex. In fact, some of the best reframes are lines that women typically say to men. Here are a few examples. Stop trying to get in my pants. Women, you all only want one thing. My eyes are up here. Stop objectifying me. Or one of Bobby Rio's favorite lines, oh my God, you're looking at me like a fat kid looks at cake. Now, obviously, you want to use lines like this when you're bantering with a woman and when it's obvious that you're making a joke. If she looks freaked out or she apologizes, you probably did it wrong. Her initial response should be laughter, and ideally, as the date progresses, she should start getting sexually aroused since you're framing yourself as the prize. All right, so there you have it, the 5 ways to move a conversation in a more sexualized direction. Keep in mind though, I don't necessarily recommend that you suddenly run out and start sexualizing every conversation you have with every woman you talk to. An attractive conversation cycles between several different topics and themes. So conversational elements like banter, tension, rapport, and relatability are just as important as bringing up sex. In fact, in the early stages of a conversation, they're even more important. So to help make sense of this, I actually went ahead and created this conversational roadmap to give you an overview of how attractive communication works. Having the so-called gift of gab with women really isn't about always having the perfect line or a witty comeback. Instead, it's about understanding the dynamics at play and knowing how to use them to your advantage. So that's why I wanted to create this resource, which is on my blog, and you can check it out for free. All you need to do is go to this link, or you can scroll down and I'm going to put it in the description so you can just click on it there. Again, it's free, so there's nothing you need to buy or nothing you need to do if you want to go check it out. Although, if you found this video useful, please go ahead and give it a like and subscribe. Also, connect with me on social media as well. If you're on Instagram, TikTok, or X, give me a follow because I post exclusive content on all those platforms. And finally, if there's a topic or there's a question that you'd like me to cover, leave it in the comment section. I genuinely enjoy hearing from you guys. So that's all I got for today. Thanks for watching.